All right.
Continue.
Nice. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here today virtually. We're thrilled to have best-selling author Donna Leon with us, videoing all the way from Switzerland, right, Donna?
Oh, I'm in Venice.
Venice. Oh, great. So she's in Venice. We also have Elsie Souza, events manager and leader of our Mysteries to Die For book club and the general heart of Bookstore One. So I'm going to turn to Elsie to introduce Donna. And once Donna's presentation is through, we're going to turn to the chat here in Zoom, and Elsie will ask Donna some of your questions. So as questions come to you, just feel free to write them right in the chat. So Elsie, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Well, good evening, Donna.
Hello.
Venice is the stage as Donna Leon captures the soul of the mythical city in elegant style. We peer behind the curtain for an intimate view of the Venetians, their customs, culture, and moral compass through the eyes of Commissario Guido Brunetti, his family and colleagues in an honest, compelling manner. 31 books later, we are off to a coffee and Il Gazzettino in Give Unto Others because her mother was good to mine.
Yeah, that's the reason. I was raised with a couple of rules, not very many, and one was be polite. I think the thing that my mother taught me and taught my brother was that we had to be polite, no matter what happens. If someone steps on your foot, say, excuse me. And the same has been conveyed to Brunetti, so that he too is almost always polite. And in this book, he has a problem. He has someone come to the questura, someone he knew in his past life, in his personal life, whom he was really not particularly fond of. She was okay. She was the daughter of the upstairs neighbor, but the upstairs neighbor was always good to Brunetti's mother. And so Brunetti feels after 30, 40 years, he still feels this enormous and powerful, not desire, but obligation to be good to that woman's daughter. And I decided to do it I keep saying when I talk about writing or when I write about writing, that a writer of fiction, also a writer of nonfiction, can't just talk, they have to show. They can't just write, they have to show something. And so I wanted somehow to show why Brunetti would feel so hopelessly outgunned in this. He has to help this woman no matter what happens, because years ago, 40 years ago, when Brunetti, 50 years ago, when Brunetti was still a student, he was sitting in their kitchen at the kitchen table, writing his homework. And the narrator mentions in passing that this was the only flat surface in the apartment big enough for him to write on. So he always had to do his homework in the kitchen. And so the narrator describes the way there's a knock at the door, and the woman from upstairs comes down, and she's carrying a pot, a large pot. And she comes in and says, "Oh, Guido, you have to help me. I'm such a goose. I'm so silly. I'm so careless. I'm so irresponsible. Yesterday, your mother gave me the recipe for her pasta fagioli, and I decided that I would make it for my family today because hers smelled so good. But silly thing that I am, I didn't remember her recipe properly, so I made it double. I doubled everything. I don't know why I did this, but I doubled everything. So I'm left with an extra pot of pasta fagioli. Would you please help me? Would your family help me and take this and eat it? Because if I leave it upstairs, my husband's going to give me trouble and I'm going to be shown to be a fool. So you are helping me by taking this food. So by doing this, the woman has ignored the poverty of the Brunetti family. She has not embarrassed Brunetti. She has not embarrassed Brunetti's mother. She has not embarrassed the entire family by saying, here, you're poor, I'm rich, take this food. And Brunetti takes her over to the stove, helps her put the food down on the stove, and then she leaves. He thanks her and she leaves. And Brunetti takes the lid off the pot. And the perfume of the pasta and the fagioli and the onions and the garlic and the spices and the sausage rise up, and Brunetti looks down and feels this enormous sense of relief because he won't be hungry that night. This is one of the opening scenes of the book. So everything, not everything, but a lot of things have been set up. The reader is reminded that Brunetti, although he's married to the daughter, the professor daughter of one of the richest men in the city, Conte Orazio Falier, who owns who knows what and is noble with it, Brunetti comes from nothing. He's a what do you call him? Gutter snipe, all but. But he has become, I've just got a strange picture on my screen. Do you have it, or can you hear me still? And are you seeing what I'm seeing? Has a man's face just appeared on the screen?
Weird. Not for us.
Okay, he's gone. Oh no, okay. It's because I was invited to dinner tonight. So I'm at I'm at a friend's house for dinner. We're not having pasta fagioli. And I'm in another room while they're inside having cocktails. And the man whose picture showed up on the screen was one of the people who just walked in.
Oh,
anyway,
funny.
what this scene hopes to show is how Brunetti is sometimes reminded of his past, his poor past, and how this woman created the situation 40 years later, not by giving the food, not only by giving the food, but by going far beyond that and not embarrassing his mother. So when this woman, when the woman's daughter comes to Brunetti, he can't say no. There's no way on the earth that he could say, no, I'm not going to help you on my spare time with this investigation. He has to. But at the beginning, it's made clear that he's not really eager to take this case on, especially when she says, shh, I don't want the police mixed up in this. I want you to hand it privately. But he can't say no. He's stuck. And as the investigation continues and becomes more complex, he is repeatedly aware of how much he doesn't want to be there, how much he's in an uncomfortable place. The actual investigation, the story that the woman tells him, is that her daughter is married, so the old woman's granddaughter obligation into the third generation is involved with what in Italian is called an onlus, an organizzazione non per scopo di lucro. It's an organization that is nonprofit. He's working for a nonprofit. He's leading a nonprofit organization about which there are certain questions. The idea for this book came to me, was given to me by a friend who worked for an onlus in Italy. And I've known them forever. I've known them for probably for 40 years, 30 or 40 years. And I noticed over the course of months that he was becoming increasingly nervous and edgy and unhappy. And he's a happy-go-lucky guy. So finally I said, this is none of my business. Is there something wrong? And he said, yeah, I can't stand my job. I can't stand my job anymore. And I, of course, nosy, asked, why not? And he said, it's bogus. It's just bogus. And I can't, I'm an honest person. I like to think I'm a decent person. And I can't continue to work for this organization because it is a fraud. And I said, well, good luck. And he maybe a month later he quit, or 2 weeks later he quit. And this was during COVID. So it was during a time of very, very high unemployment in Italy. And so he had very little chance of getting another job, but he had reached that point where he just couldn't do it anymore. So he quit. He has since found a job. But I thought this could be the, I have, let me get it in the camera right. I have a, I don't want to call it a sixth sense, but I can generally tell when a story that I'm told or something that I read in the newspaper or something that I see is enough for a story. In the last book, Transitory Desires, just to give another example of maybe the way a writer's mind works. I read in the Gazzettino, my Bible, the local newspaper, of which I'm always making fun, that there had been an incident the previous night, or the previous night, when a boat at 2 o'clock in the morning pulled up at the emergency entrance, the emergency dock of the hospital. And a young man brought up onto the deck where not the pronto soccorso, the emergency people bring in emergency cases. He carried a girl, a young woman, up onto the deck and set her down. He went and got another one out of the boat and brought her up. They were both unconscious. And then he went over to the wall near the door of the entrance to the emergency ward and pushed the alarm bell, which should ring at the front desk of the hospital, of the emergency ward. And then he ran back across the dock and went down the ladder, and you could hear, according to the Gazzettino, a motor of a boat take off. And they had no idea who had brought these girls in. One had a broken arm and one had just been banged about. She had maybe a cut on her face or something, and a contusion on her head, but not a concussion. And I was as puzzled as the Gazzettino, because I thought, why would a man at 2 o'clock in the morning bring two injured girls to the pronto soccorso, to the first aid, ring the bell and leave? It just didn't. Those were lines that I couldn't get to make any sense together. So I started thinking about that, and I thought, and then in the newspaper, it was revealed who they were. And the boy did it because he had used his father's boat. His father didn't know that he was out on the Laguna with two, I think they were Canadian girls, he and his friend had picked up and invited for a joyride. It was completely innocent. This was not drug, sex, and rock and roll. This is just two guys on a summer night with a boat, chatting with two girls and say, you want to go for a ride? Let's go, I've got a boat. And unfortunately, in the Laguna, there are enormous poles driven into the mud that mark channels. One of them, in rising tides, lowering tides, and waves and storms, had worked itself loose from the bottom and had come out and it toppled over and was floating around in the channel. These things are as thick as a man's thigh or thicker, and maybe 2 meters long. And so if you hit one in a light, fast moving boat with an outdoor motor, there's going to be that impact. And the girls were propelled forward out of their seats in the back. And they were unconscious because both of them hit their heads. So the guy did what any intelligent person would do. Rather than calling and saying, send an ambulance, he turned his boat into an ambulance and took them immediately to the hospital. But he was afraid of his daddy. He didn't want to get yelled at for having been driving too fast or been driving out on the Laguna at night. And I thought, yeah, but why would a young man not want his father to know that he was using the boat at night? And so there in that book, just as in Given to Others, Brunetti was led into an investigation by a memory, an accident. This is what happens usually when I start a book. I get an idea, I have an idea, I read something, and it's like that game that we used to play in the comic books. How many cats are in this tree? What's wrong with this photo? I just look at it and I say, why? Why that? Why did that happen? Why did they behave that way? And so I've got the book started. I've taught creative writing for my sins, and I added to my sins because I lied a lot. And one of the things I told the students was always have, so this is growing while I'm speaking, always have a complete story. I would just look them in the eyes and say, always plan the entire book, know what the characters are like, think about them, plan them, blah, 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 blah. Never. I just jump in with something like this. So from the beginning of the book, I have to write some sort of semi-introduction in terms of the story that will lead up to that event, the crash of the boat, or the scene that allows Brunetti to continue with the investigation. And usually from there, I don't have a clue. During the writing of a book, I really never have a clue as to what's going to happen or what it's all about. I have to discover that by keeping on writing the book, which is, it's worked. It's worked so far 31 times. So I figure somewhere in this jumble between my ears, something's going on that gives me, it's like reading a book. It's very much like reading a book. As I turn the pages in my head, the story, that's what happens. Because in writing, as I do it, there's a path. And then at a certain point, there is the possibility of going either right or going either left. So what I do when I get there is think, oh, maybe I'll go right. Maybe I'll have him be suspicious of his brother-in-law, or maybe I want to see some more about what he does in his professional life. And I go either way. But I never know when the next division is going to come. But thank God it's worked and continues to work. I think that this is the way many writers of fiction run their lives. They run their work. They allow imagination to keep on doing its job while they're telling the story. Sometimes I'll sit and look at the computer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but very often not. I'll just open the computer. My pattern is that I'll write something. I'll write chapter on a day. I'll write chapter 14. And then the next day, and always, if I finish 14 and I know I'm soon going to stop, I start 15 because I have momentum. So I'll say, okay, that happened. This would probably happen next. So I'll write the first 3 or 4 sentences of the next chapter and then stop. And then when I start the next day, I have to read chapter 14 to remind myself of what has happened. And then I'm off with 15. And this too has always worked. I like to believe that in my head, while I'm talking to you, while I'm having dinner tonight, something will be settled in my brain about what happened, how to resolve something, and then go on to something else. And from the little I know, I don't know many writers, but it seems to me that people either they come in two models. One is the person who just writes, and the second is the person who plans and then writes. My best friend writer, Judith Flanders, who has written an English woman who has written a couple of crime stories, makes a chapter 1, this happens, chapter 2 happens, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I couldn't do that if my life depended on it. I wish I could, because it would be so easy just to go, shh. But I can't do that. I can't do the former. I'm stuck with the latter. I don't know to talk about writing or to talk about the book. I find that talking about writing is more interesting to me. The book goes on, and he investigates this charity, and it is a book in which Senorina Elektra, whom I adore, triumphs, because she is really needed to figure out what's been going on. And in this book, she manages to break into, and the only thing that stops her is an international hotel. She can break into the airlines records, into the pilots records, into the airport records. But when she gets to hotels who have to preserve the privacy of their guests, she's absolutely blocked. I don't know if that's true or not, but I thought it amused me that she can get into the Vatican, but she can't get into the Hilton. I like her because she can do all the stuff that I can't do. If this thing has a problem, I immediately become a hysterical, crazy person, because I know it's terminal. I know it's a fatal affliction that if I forget to do something and the computer does, if I don't turn the button, if I don't push the on button and I can't get the computer to come on, I tend to panic. So Senorina Elektra is a gift from heaven, because she can do everything, and I can tell her in a very authoritative manner, well, perhaps you could break into the labor, the Department of Labor, or into the Carabinieri, or into the Ministry of Justice. Maybe you can find the judge's notes from, and she just goes off and she finds what I want, she finds what I need. And I can read the paper and write text, read the Gazzettino, of course, and write text. I'm trying to think of some of the other questions that get asked often that might satisfy people, because I know people are very curious about the way writers work, because most people aren't writers. One is, how did it all start? I have explained this creation myth a number of times. I am by training and profession an academic. I did my graduate work on Jane Austen, and for about 20 years, I taught university English classes. So my background is English literature, nothing else. But my passion is opera. I was in the opera house here in Venice, La Fenice, 35 years ago, 33 years ago, and a friend was conducting an opera by Donizetti, and he and his wife were Sicilian. Remember that. We were in the dressing room of La Fenice, and they started speaking of another conductor whom they did not like for personal reasons. And I had some acquaintance with them, and I joined in. And there was, because it was two Sicilians and someone who was half Irish, there was an escalation, which is an Italian word. That's become an Italian word, un escalation. And we were planning how to kill him in the dressing room. And as we were doing this, the idea came into my head, boing, boing, boing. Wouldn't that be a great idea for a murder mystery? I wonder if I could write a murder mystery. When I was in grad school, I'm sure I read hundreds of them, because after teaching and taking classes all day long and thinking about the Fairy Queen or about Beowulf or about the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, I thought, what a relief. I would go home and read Agatha Christie, Simenon, whoever was on the shelf in the library. And so I knew the pattern. I knew the skeleton of a crime book. You get someone killed. It helps if it's someone famous because more attention will be paid to it. You have confusion about the crime, who could have done it, who had a chance to do it. And then you line up the suspects. This one for this reason, this one for, and the bulk of the book, the guts of the book, usually the vulnerable middle, are the people who had reason to commit the crime. So the investigator, and you need an investigator, would go from this person to that person, this person to that person, until there was enough evidence accumulated about the person who turned out finally to be the guilty person. So I knew that pattern. So I started with the way many crime books begin, with the discovery of the deceased. And then the rest was just formulaic. I needed a detective, or I needed someone to investigate. And since I was living in Venice, I decided that and it had happened at La Fenice, the book had to be set in Venice. It is the only place I've ever lived for a long time in my life. And it's the only place that I could write about with any assurance, with any certainty about turn left, turn right, that it's a shoe store there and not a bookstore. And so I set the book in Venice. And then when it came to the question of the detective, I had the good sense, because I wanted to write one book and only one book. I had the good sense my friend has dogs.
Oh, is that coming from the Zoom?
It's coming from the next room. I had the good sense to make him someone that I would find sympathetic. So I made him be a well-educated person, and to be a Commissario di Polizia in Venice, he would have to have a university degree, probably in law. So my hero would be someone who had a university degree, and I made it law. Given his age, whatever his age was then, 40, 45, excuse me, he'd be married. He would be married, because most attractive Italian men are married by that time. And of his generation, he'd probably have 2 kids. And calculating the ages, the kids are now in their 40s, but we're not going to talk about that. They would be teenagers. So I gave him a boy and a girl, teenagers, and he would be married. So I gave him, and this was dumb luck, I gave him a university professor, which allows me to make all of the literary allusions. And she's a bit of a wise ass too. Probably because she is the daughter of one of the wealthiest people in Venice. Not only wealthy, but noble. He's a count. So I didn't know it at the time, but this allowed me, because Italy is still a country, and Venice particularly, is a place where nobility still counts. The nobles of the city are known to be nobles and are addressed by their titles. And so I gave him, and he's just an upstart poor kid who got lucky because he was very intelligent. and rose through university stunningly well and decided he wanted to be a cop. But so he would have access to people of his class and below. But by giving him the wife and the father-in-law and the mother-in-law that he now has access, not by showing his badge, but by presenting himself to everyone in the city would know that although he's a policeman, he is also the son-in-law of Conte Orazio Falier. So that gives him a lot of clout, but it's sort of evanescent clout because he doesn't have a degree, he doesn't have a paper, he doesn't have a document, he doesn't have a badge, but he has his wife and he has his parents-in-law. So all of a sudden, Brunetti, who can go to the fish market and sort of put the frighteners into the fishermen, he's also got the ability to go into Palazzo something and talk to Count somebody and be accepted because he is the son-in-law of the Count, and he has perhaps been there for dinner. Were he Guido nobody, he wouldn't get that kind of treatment. And that was just dumb luck that I made him married to a rich, noble woman, because it gave him a lot of invisible power. And luckily, I've used that endlessly in the various books where he has had to deal with that stratum of society. And luckily, I know a number of people who are members of the nobility. And they just over the course, I lived in Venice for, I don't know, 35 years. And I met a lot of people. And I was presented to a lot of people who I later learned were noble people, because they don't go around, they don't go around wearing their crowns or with big badges saying, I'm a noble person. They're just ordinary people who go out to work every day. But I managed somehow to be accepted into that society because in sort of a reverse of Brunetti's situation, I have a friend who is a good friend, an intimate friend, l'amico del cuore, who is a member of that society. And so I would trail along in his wake, observing, just observing. And I've come to have a very high opinion of them, simply because they are people who go out to work every morning, who go out from the palazzo, but they go to work. Okay, that's blah, blah, blah. That's enough blah, blah. Why don't we have some questions?
So let me ask 2 questions, and we do have some. Please send your messages through chat. Why were you, and this is what everyone wants to know, why aren't your books translated into Italian?
Okay, there are 2 answers. One is I'm back in Venice for a week, and I am recognized, if I'm not wearing my mask, I am recognized all the time. People stop me and ask for an autograph, or they say, oh, blah, 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 I like your books, blah, blah, blah. These are Germans or French. So I really don't much like being a famous person. I mean it. I think she meant it too. It makes me faintly uncomfortable because there's a kind of disequality in that. Because I'm the famous person and this is the person who's asking me for an autograph and they feel embarrassed. People tremble and it makes me very uncomfortable. The other is more realistic. I have had 2 Italians almost attack me about the books, about what was written in the books. And they were both old women who were monolingual. They spoke only Italian. And so I had the patience, because they deserve it, to ask them why they accused me of saying bad things about Italy and saying that Italians were dishonest, that Italians were corrupt. And come to find out, they had read an article in the previous day's newspaper which talked about this American writer who wrote crime books about Italy, who talked about corruption here, corruption there, corruption there. And I thought, please don't ever let these books be printed in Italy, because no Italian has ever objected to anything in the book, because what the Italian crime writers say is infinitely more damaging than what I say. I don't want to live with that. I don't want to be taken as someone who is sort of spitting on Italy after living in it, blissfully happy for 35 years, because I have nothing but love and respect for the country and the people. So that's the first question, and a long answer.
And why have you moved to Switzerland?
The answer is numeric. Okay, I'm going to give you two numbers. First number, 50,000. Okay, 50,000. Okay, now 33 million. Woo, 33 million. This is the number of residents in the city, and this is the number of tourists who come every year. It became, in the course of my living here, I moved here, and I came first in 68, and I think I moved here permanently, knowing it would be permanent in 79. So I've been in and out. I was in and out for 10 years, and I've been here since a long time, 40 years. The city has changed. The city I moved to was a sort of a very, very beautiful, rural, not very sophisticated, but very quiet tourist site with maybe a couple thousand tourists a year, maybe 10, maybe 20,000 tourists a year. So you didn't really notice them. But in the last 2 years that I was here, I lived like a naturalist on the path where the wildebeests migrated. So I would step out my front door, and I would step into a stream of people who had every right to be doing what they were doing, which is what I did when I came, stopping and looking at the beauty that was bludgeoning them from every corner. But I wanted to go buy bread, and they were in my way, and they were in my way, and they were in my way. And what was on offer in the city became increasingly ugly. There are lots of windows with ugly things in it. The restaurants changed, and it's almost impossible to find a good, non-expensive restaurant, because they're all just filling tourists' bellies. And I wasn't having a whole lot of fun being here, because so much time getting from point A to B. I was happy in A, and I'd be happy when I got to B. But the process of getting from A to B was just a pain in the neck. And I finally said, I don't want to live with this. So I moved to a village with 350 people and 350 cows. And that's much better than what I meet here. The odds are better.
We have a question about one of your favorite books, Jewels of Paradise. And the person, the person wanted to know, was it more difficult to write this kind of a book than Brunetti?
No. I got suckered into writing that book. Cecilia Bartoli, the opera singer, is an old friend of mine. And about, 15 years ago, she said, Donna, mi aiuti. Donna, would you help me? Of course, Cecilia, what would you like? She said, I would like you to write something for my new, it wasn't Salieri. Who was it? I can't even remember his name. An Italian composer. She wanted me to write about this Italian composer. And I thought, well, maybe for the CD booklet, or for the this, or for the that. And I said, because of why? She said, fiction. She wanted me to write a novel about this guy. And I thought, I told her I'd do it. I owe her a debt I can never pay, because she sung so well so many times that I'd seen her. So I said, okay. So she gave me the name of the composer, which I've forgotten. It's because it begins with S, but it's not Salieri. So I had to figure a way to write sort of a crime book, but in the world of musicology. And I loved it. I had so much fun writing that book because I could invent. I think there's a drunken Hungarian musicologist, monosyllabic, and there's a mystery about why this guy's papers are hidden. And there's a trunk. It was every cliche of the non-murder mystery. And it was glorious fun. And sometime when I have enough time, and I don't know when that's ever going to be, I would like to write another one and take her to Naples and write a book set in Naples.
So do you consult the policia about your procedures or anything? No.
No, I'm sure it's all wrong, but it's believable, isn't it?
It's very believable, yes. And do you think Brunetti will have the same feelings one day about just in general? What will he do? I'm not sure.
About leading the city?
Right.
No, Venetians can't.
Oh,
And
how
it's not because they would have trouble finding a house or an apartment or a job. It's because Venetians' involvement with their city is so intimate and so total that they can't live anywhere else. Because if you've grown up surrounded by beauty every instant of your waking day for all of your life, you can't move to Mestre, you can't move to Dolo, you can't move to some city that isn't beautiful, and you can't go and live among cars or you'll be dead in a day because you're not used to having something whizzing by that weighs a couple of tons. And it's quiet here. Everybody knows everybody. It takes you twice as long to get across the city as it would anyplace else because you stop and see people. I haven't lived here, I think, for 2 years, but I calculate when I'm here, I calculate extra time to go from A to B because I know I'm going to meet so many people. And I do. I have every day that I've been here for the last week. No, it's impossible for them to move. So Brunetti could never move.
So you mentioned that you read a lot of mystery authors.
Mhm.
Do you have a favorite mystery author?
I have two. Ross MacDonald, who I think is glorious. I think his talent is wonderful. And he is also a marvelous writer. He writes beautifully. And the other is Ruth Rendell. And for the same reason, she wrote beautifully well. She could, even the beginning of my favorite of her books is Judgment in Stone. Eunice Parchman killed the Coverdale family because she could not read or write. So in the first sentence, she gives you the name of the killer, the name of the victims, the family. She killed the family, and the motive, because she couldn't read and write. And then for the next 350 pages, you know what's going to happen. And every time I've read that book or taught that book, I find myself saying, no, don't say that, don't say that, don't do that. Because I so desperately want to save those people because they're good people. But it's never worked. They always get blasted away. I think it's a sensational book. And you can reveal the ending. Eunice Parchman killed the Coverdale family because she could not read or write. Yes, she was a great writer.
Oh, thank you for bringing us there. And someone wants to know, are you planning to write anything about Switzerland?
No. I could, but it would be stupid because I lived here for 40 years. So I know how people respond. I know their opinions, and I know why they have their opinions. And I know the justification that they will give for their opinions. So I can write about them believably, but I couldn't write about the Swiss believably.
So I have a question for you. I saw you in an interview when you were discussing the role of opera in the books that you write. You mentioned there were arias and recitativos. Could you just expound on that a little bit?
Okay. In opera, there are two forms of music. One is called recitativo, which is where someone says, "Oh, yesterday we were in Verona and we had a good time playing with." So you know what happened. They were in Verona yesterday, today they're this, and you know what they did. That's what the recitativi do. They advance the action because they explain to you what has happened in the physical sense, what activity has taken place. Then there is the aria, where someone stops dead in his or her tracks and says, "Oh, I love him. Oh, I love him. I adore him. I can't live without him. I love him." Says, "I love him" or "I love her" 37 times to beautiful music, but you don't learn anything. You learn that she loves him, or you learn that, "Oh, I'm so sad, I'm going to die. Io muoio, io manco." So, io muoio, io manco. And I think the Brunetti books are very operatic in that things happen, and then all of a sudden, like the thing with the pasta fagioli, there comes an aria. It doesn't advance because it happened 40 years ago. It's not going to advance the action in the book, but it's going to tell you something, that Brunetti was poor and Isabella's mother was good to Brunetti's mother. But it doesn't tell you anything of use practically now. And that's repeated and repeated. That came to me with a flash of lightning once. And it was entirely instinctive on my part.
So you mentioned the pandemic, and in this book, you do mention the pandemic. And why did you decide to do that?
Because you can't not. A writer can't not. If a writer is writing about 2022 or 345, they cannot not talk about the residue of the pandemic. Coming here, I met someone on the street that I know. And we did what people do. You stand in front of one another and you run the odds. Are we going to shake hands? Are we going to hug? We going to kiss? What are we going to do? So this guy and I shook hands because he's an acquaintance more than he's a friend. But sometimes when I see friends, I give them a hug because I haven't seen them for 2 years and I know them. But I don't know where they've been. I don't know who they hugged last. So it's a crapshoot. You get yourself close to someone, but you're also close to the last person that they were close to. And I think that this has become an automatic, like adjusting our balance. If we're walking down a flight of steps and one step is this much shorter than another step, we adjust to that. And I think that that's what we all do with the aftermath of the pandemic. But I don't want to write about it. I don't want to write about fake green passes or people who are getting shots for other people or people who are copying this or copying that. I don't want to touch that because it doesn't interest me.
So another question, who is your favorite person you write about? Who's your favorite character of all of them in the Brunetti stories?
I like him and I like Paola, but the person that I am most perversely fond of is Vice Questore Pata, because with him, I have so managed to pull the wool over readers' eyes. People almost hiss when Pata is mentioned because they believe that he's a bad guy. But if you go through the books, he's arrogant, he's lazy, he's always grabbing the applause for what other people have done, but he's never fired anyone unjustly. He's never persecuted any of the people who work for him. There's no evidence that he's corrupt. There's no evidence that he has any flirtation with the mafia, but he has, because he's so unpleasant, but he's always semi-polite. He's this quixotic character that you can't quite, but there's no reason to suspect him of anything or no reason to arrest him. He's just not nice. So I love him because I can use him so much, but that's viewing him as the writer who's using them. I like him enormously.
So we have another question about the Brunetti novels have gone into streaming in Europe.
Mhm.
Ever happened in the United States?
No, the Germans made, I forget how many 45-minute, 55-minute serials of him, but they were each a separate book. I am, even as we speak, I am in conversation with an English production company and with an American production company. So it's got past the flirtation stage, and we're talking. They are supposed to be sending me offers. So I imagine in the next couple of years, but make that 3 or 4, because they have to write a script, they have to get the money. That's the hardest part. They have to find the actors, they have to find the everything, and they have to resign themselves to filming in Venice. I think it's the most, other than the top of the Himalayas, it's the most expensive place to film. And if the pandemic comes back and you're in Venice filming and you've got 50 people in hotels and they're stuck in those hotels for the next week, and you've got the production crew and who's going to take that chance?
Right, makes sense.
And I know you are passionate about climate change.
Yeah.
And I've been struck by the fact that your books might someday be the only link we have to Venice as she disappears.
No, there's a lot. They might be the best known novels of Venice as it was. Yeah, nobody knows what's going to happen. There were articles in the paper last week about mosaic, the thing that's supposed to go
Right.
and stop the water and doesn't. It hasn't been maintained well. There's rust. There are pieces falling off. It's just I think the whole thing was a boondoggle from the get-go. But what do I know? So maybe Venice will be left in literature or in the paintings that get shipped out or the statues that get taken out. But I think it is the biggest canary in the mine. It will go first because there's no way you can get higher. In Miami, at least, you can move away from the beach, but you can't take these buildings with you. I'm not an optimist about the future of the city at all.
Well, you certainly speak well of her and love her very, very dearly. And
No,
how
you do.
wonderful for you.
It's paradise.
So let's talk a little bit about the role of gossip. Goes all the way through. I love you for that.
Yeah.
I read the New York Post, page 6, so I know what's going on in the world.
Bottom feeder. It's
You have to be.
wonderful.
And so the role of it for you is really important. You pick up these little grains of information. And the other thing I mentioned when I introduced you, it's always about having a coffee. And I'm intrigued by that. You must hear more information when you go to your local little.
I hear wonderful things. Once, some years ago, the best I ever heard, I was in a bar where I always go having a coffee, and there were 2 then older ladies, white-haired, properly dressed Venetian ladies, and they were talking about the danger from the cruise ships that one would bang into the riva by San Marco and the basilica would collapse. And they were discussing this possibility because there had been a near miss with one of the cruise ships the week before. And one of them said, yeah, but what would they do if they brought the basilica down? And the other one, a Venetian woman in her 80s, said, well, you know, Lucia, there's a lot of money to be made in rebuilding. So even they are arrived at a point of such cynicism about the government of the city that they would say something. I didn't say that. And I didn't get into their conversation. But that was the vision of a woman, obviously Venetian, because they were speaking Veneziano. They weren't speaking Italian. And she thought, oh, yeah, they make a lot of money by rebuilding the basilica.
I love it. I love it. So I know there's also been a cookbook, and I don't think you wrote it. I know you wrote introductions to it.
No.
But what a major thing. And so what do you have? What are you having for dinner tonight? I want to know. Do you know?
No, I don't know yet. I
Oh, okay. All right.
deal with the cookbook. Oh, the dogs are barking again. They asked me, my German publisher said that they got lots of requests to make a cookbook. So I said, I'm a cook. I'm an okay cook, but I'm not a great cook. If you let my friend Biba, who has been feeding me for then 30 years, 20 years, if you let her write the recipes, I'll write a few essays about Italians' attitude towards food. So they agreed to that. But Biba did all of the cooking. She did all of the I did some of the testing. In fact, I still remember the one week when we had 5 days in a row. We had risotto con zucca. We had risotto with pumpkin. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because it had to be fresh in our mouths from the night before. So we could decide about, she and her husband and I could decide about whether it should be marjoram and timo or it should be basilico. And so I think I absented myself Friday night. I invented something. I have to fly to the moon because I couldn't.
I love it. Well, do you have any questions for me?
We have one more question that appeared
Okay.
in the chat, which is, what is your rewriting process like? How much rewriting do you typically do?
I do it with great reluctance. I hate it. I hate rewriting. And luckily, I don't have to do a lot. Most of it I do the day after, when I read what I wrote the day before. I read it in a different way, so I listen to it. I listen to the cadence of the music of the language, and then I change it so that it sounds better.
Mhm.
And then I have a great editor in Zurich, and I have learned that she's right and I'm wrong, so that when there's a mistake in chronology or in relationship, she's right and I change it.
Mhm. Makes sense.
And what do you miss most about the United States?
Nothing.
Nothing. Honesty. Okay.
No, nothing.
Okay. Well, I have a present for you that's going to go to New York, and then they can send it on. My husband is an artist, and I don't know.
Oh,
He did the cover of your book. He painted it.
wonderful. How very kind.
So we'll send it to New York, and they can
Send
send
it to
it.
Grove. Yeah, send it to Grove Atlantic, and they'll send it to me and I'll put it on the wall.
And then I also want to thank your incredible staff in New York at Grove. They were marvelous for us to work with,
Mhm.
and you're so lucky to have that.
Mhm.
I am.
Mhm.
I am. I have the two best publishers, the best German publisher and the best American publisher.
Great.
And we feel so lucky to have had you on this call
The
today.
pleasure was entirely mine. Really, it was great fun. Thank you. Thank you for the chance.
So much. And thanks to everybody, thanks LC and everybody who joined today. And just make sure that if you haven't already, you can check the link in the chat box, and that will, if you click it, it'll lead you right to the online shop where you can pre-order, special order, a copy of Donna's book, Give Unto Others. And it's a signed copy too. So, and you'll get your 20% discount.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very, very much for your time and your
Thank you.
interest.
Thank
And
you.
let's do it again.
Yes,
We
definitely,
shall.
Good,
definitely.
okay.
All right, enjoy dinner.
Thanks. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Thank you.